I just finished my time at the virtual Sundance Film Festival. Here are my thoughts on Sundance 2024. Hey everyone, I'm Dylan. Welcome to the DYL Pickle Movie Network. I just realized there's a terrible glare in my glasses right now, so I'm going to take these off. I'm going to throw them over there. Probably shouldn't have thrown them, they're glass. Anyway, here are my thoughts on Sundance 2024. I've been attending the Sundance Film Festival since, I believe, the year going from 2020 to 2021, because it was the same Oscars as Judas and the Black Messiah, and I remember Judas and the Black Messiah was premiering at Sundance, and I was so excited for it. It was actually the very first review I ever did on this channel.
I really want to talk about the film in the moment, how I feel about it, but I also want to allow my opinion to change about a film, and I do suspect that with more viewings of this film, it'll only enrich the viewing experience even more for myself.
So it's just so cool to kind of come full circle and to have gone from seeing one film at the festival, and that being like the big film I saw, to watching more and more films as the years have trickled on. Now, of course, I don't go to Sundance in person, I watch them at home, and the past few years there's been so much online availability for Sundance, and this year they kind of scaled back a little bit on that. It was a lot more in-person screenings than online screenings, and I know there's like two ends of the coin on complaints about that. Some people complaining that there aren't enough titles online, and my rebuttal to that is that for the past 2 years we've had so many titles online, and we still had a lot of titles to choose from online this year, and I'd argue some of the ones we saw online are some of the better films of the festival, so I don't think that's anything to really poo-poo, and it gives you something to be more excited about later in the year. Movies like Hitman, Richard Linklater's new film, Love Lies Bleeding, I Saw the TV Glow, My Old Ass, all these films that I was so hyped for. I mean, Freaky Tales, which was like my number one most anticipated film of the festival, I didn't get to see because I didn't get to see it in person, but that just makes me more excited to see it later in the year. It gives me something to build hype and enthusiasm for. So I do understand the complaints that you can't see everything online, but I also think just the fact that we can see anything online is a huge win that some people aren't necessarily taking consideration into. But here we are talking about the films I did see online. I did see 9 films in total. I saw 8 of them at the Sundance Film Festival. I saw one a day later on Netflix because it dropped right away. So I'm going to count it towards my personal top 5 because it's also an amazing film I want to tell you about. But I watched 9 films, and of those 9 films, I liked 6 of them. I would even go as far as to say I appreciated 7 of them. There was one film, the Kristen Stewart, Stephen Yeun film, Love Me. It was very ambitious and very abstract, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I don't even know if I loved it necessarily, but I totally appreciated it. So 7 for 9 is a really good outcome, considering I didn't see as many films as I saw the past 2 years at Sundance, but of the 9 I saw, the fact that 7 of them are films I would at least recommend to someone is a pretty great feat in and of itself. And I'm going to break down my top 5 in just a sec, but I do want to shout out some of the films that just missed the cut in my top 5. The 2 films I would steer away from, the 2 films that I really did not like at Sundance, one of them was called Handling the Undead. This is a Norwegian film which actually sees the reunion of the 2 lead actors from Worst Person in the World, which is kind of why I was so hooked on this film and checking out this film. But having watched the film, it's just too slow for me. It's just not the type of pacing I enjoy. I like a slow film if I'm still engaged, but I think I kind of understood what it was saying in the first 10-15 minutes, and then past that I was like, all right, what else does it have to say? And I didn't feel like it was saying anything extra than what I had kind of interpreted from the first 10-15 minutes. It kind of centers around this premise of zombies, but not in the typical zombie movie way where they're like kind of these, brain craving creatures who are trying to eat you. No, it's more so just like these just lifeless bodies that are obviously alive again because they are zombies, but the idea of what it actually would mean to bring someone back from the dead, and is that even worse than just putting them to rest in a peaceful way? The idea of rest in peace. I think it has a lot of cool things to think about, but I don't think it's conveyed in a very interesting way. Plus there's a lot of animal brutality which I didn't like in it, so that's one of the ones I did not like from the festival. The other one, which was my least favorite film of the festival, is a film called Little Death. This is a film starring David Schwimmer. It's got a lot of other great names amongst the cast like Gabby Hoffman, Dominic Fike, Talia Ryder, Jenna Malone, Seth Green, Fred Melamed. I mean, all these great actors, but the whole premise, it just kind of centers around this character who's just so miserable, and there are films like that I love, like Uncut Gems, but the whole time it was just kind of watching this unpleasant character go about his unpleasant ways and long for unpleasant things, and it was all mixed with this really distracting AI editing choice, where there was so many AI animations that would kind of slip in and out of the live action stuff. The film does take a pivot in the second half that I appreciated because I hated the first half so much, but all that glaring, whatever the hell it was, just was not enough for me to enjoy the second half. I was just so distracted and so off-put by the first half. AI is not art. It is not art. It is not a substitute to art. It is no excuse to not hire visual effects artists or animators. I mean, they could have created some really cool sequences with animation or with visual effects, and I understand maybe films don't have a budget to do so, but if you don't have the budget to do so, try to work within your budget or don't use it altogether. But to go to AI as a substitute, or if it was an art choice, I just don't know. It wasn't a pleasant art choice to see. So I would stay away from Little Death as well. But the other films I'm going to talk about are all recommendations, and one of them that came very close to making my list that I wanted to shout out is a film called Rob Peace. This is a film directed by star Chiwetel Ejiofor. This is not his directorial debut. He's made a few films before, but I have not seen him in the director's chair before. So it was very exciting to see an actor work on a film as a director, because I think when a director has acting experience, there's just something you're able to get across to your actors in that working that I find really beneficial. As someone who has, worked with actors turned directors, it's really nice to see how understanding a director could be of the actor's process, and it's very clear here because the acting is what is first and foremost the highlight of this film, especially like Camila Cabello, who is an amazing artistic music presence, but I really didn't like her film Cinderella. I thought she was not great in it, but this film, I thought she was great in it. So I think it's one of those things where if you're working with the right director who knows how to work with actors and you have that potential, a real good director can pull that potential out of you. The way this is filmed and shot is a little bit standard, I would say, in terms of biopics, so that's why it didn't make my top 5, because it is a little conventional in terms of its presentation. But I think how Chiwetel Ejiofor directs his actors and just the overall story of this kid whose father is sentenced for a crime he supposedly did not commit, and the kid kind of grows up to be into law and into trying to make his life mission to free his father from jail, but also trying to find his own ambitions. And yes, it does lead to some unnecessary subplots. Like, I think there were just almost too many subplots stuffed into this thing, but I did appreciate how it kind of showed this really great character arc and growth of this kid as he gets older trying to free his father, but then the kind of questions that come up of, is my father actually innocent? And these questions that he never asked as a kid because he just assumed, or he just kind of was told information that he chose to believe, and as he gets older he kind of tries to come up with these own questions for himself. I just thought it was a really good film, and it didn't make my top 5, but I want to recommend it, especially for the performances that Chiwetel Ejiofor is able to bring out from his actors and himself, because he's amazing in this film. But in terms of what my top 5 films of this festival are, and I cannot wait to talk about these, what's so exciting about Sundance is just being able to kind of look at these with a fresh lens. There aren't a lot of films that people have seen before, so you can't really go into it with any sort of expectation beyond the actors, director, and premise that you read in the synopsis. So that's why Sundance is so exciting for me, because I'm going to these films so blind, with no real idea of what they're going to be. And one of these films, my number 5, is a film that I kind of prejudged, because a few years ago at the festival, I saw a director's work that I did not like, and then going into this film, I was like, all right, this is a second shot for this director. Is this going to be great? And it ended up being great, and that is A Real Pain, directed and written by Jesse Eisenberg. The film I was alluding to is When You Finish Saving the World, which is a film that Eisenberg made a few years ago at the Sundance Film Festival that I didn't love, and I went into this with apprehension because of that. But because I had that apprehension, my expectations were definitely exceeded, and I think this film is a very good example of just a director not necessarily nailing it on the first try, but still having enough creativity and actually hitting it out of the park on the second go. This film centers around Jesse Eisenberg's character and his cousin, played by Kieran Culkin, as they go to Poland to basically explore the towns and villages and places where their grandmother lived, and where their grandmother was involved in the Holocaust, where she was kept a prisoner, all those struggles she faced as a kid. They got to kind of see it and go on this kind of road trip after her passing to kind of explore their grandmother's past, which is really a meaningful premise. And I think that is already why this film is so much better than When You Finish Saving the World, because Jesse Eisenberg clearly has a love for these characters and this premise, because it is his own life. He talks about how autobiographical this was, and how, he kind of explored his own estranged relationships, because him and his cousin aren't as close as they used to be in this film, and also just kind of exploring mourning the grandmother's past, but it really is about these cousins and their relationship, because Jesse Eisenberg is a little bit more reserved, a little quieter, which is also very nice to see, considering Jesse Eisenberg tends to be the one in movies that is like talking a mile a minute, kind of snarky, a little quippy, but here he kind of plays a more straight man, and Kieran Culkin is the one who's a little larger than life. You know, he's very extroverted. You know, he clearly has a little bit of mental illness that he's trying to overcome, especially in relation to his grandmother's passing, which he has admittedly not been able to get over. So you start to see how these two personalities clash, how they often come back together again, and also when they're in the midst of this tour group, how that dynamic kind of adds to the ensemble effort at play. And I think the actors nail it. I think Kieran Culkin shows so much range here. He has the hard task of walking a tightrope between being unlikable and being lovable, because at times he is the most lovable character in this film, and at times he is the most off-putting character in this film, but even when he's off-putting, he finds a way to reel you back, and I think that's his magic as an actor, and I think Jesse Eisenberg's magic as a writer, and I think this is also a very strong screenplay from Jesse Eisenberg. I just really liked what this had to say about kind of grieving and family dynamics, and just the idea of different types of personalities trying to get along and coexist. I thought this was a real strength, not a real pain, a real strength of this festival. At number 4, we have a film that I was immediately intrigued by the premise, but I didn't really know if it was going to be good or not, or just kind of like a fun little genre exercise, but it is Thelma, which is a film about a woman who goes all John Wick after she is scammed by a phone scam of a guy pretending to be her grandson. A lot of people have said it's like John Wick, and there are parallels. I mean, it is a revenge story, but, you know, because of the nature of the film, Thelma doesn't necessarily go to the extremes that John Wick does, but it is kind of this action revenge film starring a 90-year-old woman, which I found really refreshing, because in these films, you're usually used to seeing a really, like, kind of at his prime, you know, a male action star, but now you're getting this old grandmother, and I loved it. And I loved how they kind of incorporated the actual conversations about age into the film. It's not just merely there for a gimmick to make us laugh, because haha, she's riding the scooter and she's moving really slow and she can't really hear very well because of her hearing aid. I mean, that leads to some of the comedy, but what I appreciated is that it's very open and honest, especially involving the family members around Thelma, June Squibb's character, and the idea that she is getting older, and what does it mean that she's getting older, and how should we as caregivers or as family members, how should we care for those who are getting older, and what freedom should we allow them? Because I think a lot of the time there's a stigma that, oh, when you hit a certain age, you must have like this watchful eye on you 24/7, almost Big Brother style, where you're always constantly being protected and watched and coddled like a baby. But there's also an idea of them still being humans and still being older and wiser than all of us, and the idea that sometimes you got to just let the bird fly, and that's kind of what Thelma is. You know, Thelma goes on her own journey of self-discovery and isn't kind of held down by her kids or her grandkids, but there is also that conversation of she is older, and what does that mean? It just plays such a great part in this overall really funny and really action-packed film to have these kind of conversations about aging and health. I mean, obviously, I am in my mid-20s, so my grandparents are all in their 80s, so it's really cool to kind of see my own kind of family dynamic at play in certain elements of this film, just in regards to how grandkids talk to parents who talk to grandparents, and just the kind of fun nature that comes with a grandparent-grandchild relationship. I love all my grandparents so dearly. My grandma, my opa, my nana, my pop-up, and I have great funny moments between us because of kind of the generational gaps, which is really fun to see in a movie like this, and I think June Squibb is just excellent in this lead role, and she brings a lot of charisma. Richard Roundtree is also in this film, adds a lot of great moments, both comedically and, of course, in the action and the drama. It's a very sad thing to remember that he has passed away, but it is also nice to see him give one great final performance. At number 3, we have a film called Exhibiting Forgiveness. Now, this film is very much slower and more meditative than most films I saw at the festival this year, but that's what I really appreciated about this film. This film stars Andre Holland as an artist. He is a painter who clearly has some very rooted childhood trauma that eventually comes out when his mother kind of invites his father back into his life, and it's all about how he not only learns to kind of forgive his father, but how he kind of comes to the idea of forgetting. And I think sometimes we as humans struggle to separate forgiveness and forgetting, because I think it's really easy to say I'm sorry, but it's really hard to let it go from your mind. And I think that's what this film displays really well, is the idea that forgiveness is really tough and it doesn't come easy and it doesn't come right away. And I think that's what this film does so well, is it explores that idea, especially when that trauma is so rooted and so ingrained in you to where it kind of throws your life for a loop, and it kind of puts you in a different headspace when you feel like you've moved on, when you feel like you've progressed to a better place in your life. To have this kind of past trauma kind of re-exist in your life, it can take you for a whirlwind, it can take you for a spin. And I think that's what this film does so successfully. I've seen other films that tackle similar subjects, but I think just the way it's shot, just the way it's kind of paced, it's very, breathable, if that makes sense. Like, you can feel the breath in the pacing. It doesn't feel like it rushes to any conclusions. In fact, it doesn't even really make any solid conclusions. Yes, there is a definitive kind of stamp at the end of what this character and this other character have now, what their bond or what their, tarnished relationship has built to, but at the end, we still don't have a clear picture of what forgiveness is, because it is such a messy thing. And I think that's what this film does so well. I think Andre Holland especially is able to kind of control that kind of frustration and anger so well. He's so quiet. It's such a quiet performance, but it's one of those deeply layered performances where you can just look at him and know exactly what he's thinking without words. And I think that's the power of most great actors. And Andre Holland, an actor that I am surprised has not won an Oscar, or at least been nominated for an Oscar at this point. Like, come on, Academy, what are you doing? You gave Moonlight Best Picture, but you left Andre Holland on the cutting room floor. What's up with that? He's amazing, and I think this is going to be one of his best performances when we look back at his filmography years and years and years from now, when he is a multi-Oscar winning actor. I also love the idea of art and kind of using art as a funnel for this kind of anxiety and anger and trauma. The idea that he's a painter and he sometimes reflects his anger and frustration in his painting. He'll rip off pieces of the canvas or he'll swipe over them with white paint. It's real active frustration that I, as an artist, kind of feel. I'm not a painter, but I am a musician, and sometimes when you're frustrated, you just want to like banging on the drums or like playing the piano keys real hard when you're just so frustrated and you just need to let off steam. And that also is very well conveyed in this film, the idea that he can kind of go to his art, and the fact that his wife, played by Andra Day, is also an artist, and we also get to hear her sing, which is exciting. If you're an Andra Day fan, I mean, obviously even if you're not an Andra Day fan, you know how good she is, and so to hear her singing in this film is also a treat. So I really like this film a lot. Speaking of music, my number 2 film, this is the stretch here. This is the film that I didn't see at Sundance, meaning I didn't see it on the Thursday to Sunday window. I had to watch it, but I watched it the next day on Netflix because it dropped right on Netflix. So I figured I can talk about it because it's out there, people can watch it, and I think that gives me even more reason to talk about it because you can watch it literally right now, and that is The Greatest Night in Pop, which kind of covers the studio recording session of We Are the World. Now, We Are the World was kind of my first introduction to a lot of the great stars of the 80s. My father and mother would sit me down and like play it and show me like, oh, that's Stevie Wonder, that's Bob Dylan, that's Bruce Springsteen. That's where I kind of learned all these iconic figures of pop music from. I knew who Michael Jackson was. I knew Billy Joel. Obviously, he's my favorite. Billy Joel, number 1, the GOAT. But it's really cool to kind of see the behind the scenes and see how this group kind of came together, because they only had like 8 or 9 hours to record this whole thing. It was all taking place on the actual weekend of the American Music Awards. That's how they were able to get everyone in the studio, because everyone's schedules were all over the place. They said, well, hey, you're in Los Angeles for the American Music Awards. You want to stay afterwards and record this song? And to see kind of how the process comes together of Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie writing the song, to then gathering everybody up and deciding who's going to sing what solos, to the actual recording sessions, which admittedly has some kind of fun drama, because a lot of these people have egos. A lot of these people aren't necessarily happy with the solos they have. Some of them are struggling to hit the notes. Some of them, their egos are clashing. Stevie Wonder wants to sing in Swahili, and some people are telling him, Stevie, they don't speak Swahili in Ethiopia.
There's a full-on fight going on.
What am I supposed to sing?
The clock is ticking, and we had so many disasters coming.
Like all these moments that are really fun to watch, just as someone who is like grown up watching this video and watching these artists in their own careers. It's kind of mind-blowing to see them all together. It's kind of like that movie One Night in Miami, where you're like, wow, is Muhammad Ali really talking to Malcolm X right now? And wow, like it's just one of those things you can't like wrap your head around, but this is actual footage. This is an actual documentary. You can actually see it happening, and that's what makes it all the cooler, because you can just kind of live with this and be a fly on the wall of this iconic and what I would say the most iconic moment in music history right now, at least in terms of pop music and pop culture. I mean, the fact that all these people were in the same room recording this, and I've gone on to see the other versions, like they re-recorded We Are the World for the tragedy in Haiti, but there's still something so special about the very first one, and seeing these people who didn't all even know each other. Like, I don't think Lionel Richie had even met half these people when he was trying to, organize it, because he's kind of the spearheader of the group. I really, really enjoyed this, just as someone who loves this song and loves these artists and just loves music history. It was just so intriguing. It all takes place in one night, so it's also a great bottle film, and it doesn't really even go into the lasting impact of We Are the World, because I don't think it has to, because I think it speaks for itself, because it kind of just ends after the recording session ends. But just being a fly on the wall is just so cool. So I highly recommend it. It's on Netflix now, so go check it out, like literally right now. You can come back to this video later, like go check out that documentary right now. But number one is also another documentary. I mean, Sundance, man, these Sundance documentaries have been just hitting at a high level. Last year, my number one film was Beyond Utopia, which was snubbed for an Oscar. I'll just say it one more time. It was snubbed for an Oscar. But this year produced also a number one documentary film for me, and it was Daughters. Daughters tells a story about these men in prison who are given the opportunity to have a father-daughter dance with their daughters. Some of them who they haven't seen in 5 years. Some of them they haven't seen in 5 months. Some of them they haven't seen since their daughters were babies and can't even recognize their father's faces. And there's a sadness that comes to it, but there's also a hopefulness in the idea that we can change and that we can kind of look at the bigger picture and have reasons to want to live and to want to be out and be a better person. And I love that the film doesn't dwell too much on what the actual men did to get into the prison. They more so focus on what they want to do when they get out and how to kind of heal their life and rehabilitate and reevaluate. And I really found that pretty meaningful. We also get the daughter's perspective of it, which is so crucial and so important, because we can see how their lives are affected by the absence of a parental figure or a father figure in their lives. And you also see a lot of the mother's perspective as the ones who have to kind of agree to this and allow their daughters to kind of reconcile with their parents, with their fathers. Some of them who are very eager to do so because they want that full family dynamic, and some of them who are a little more hesitant because of the stigmas of what a criminal is and the idea that some criminals, some people think they can't change, but in actuality we all can change, and it's just a matter of our own perseverance and our own mindset and our own ability to make that happen. And this film, I think, really is really reflective of that, and I really enjoyed it. You get a lot of conversations because these inmates had to go through 10 weeks of counseling and training to basically like get approved for this dance, and you start to see how these really honest and humane conversations come out, like a lot of insecurity to be had, but you also see at the end of the film how a lot of these men's lives, most of these men's lives, I would say 90%, are changed for the better, and a lot of these men who get out of prison don't go back in because they realize how precious life is and how important it is to have that familial parental bond. I just was shattered by it. I literally opened the film, about 5 minutes in I started crying, and I kind of didn't stop, It was one of those films where it's just so touching because you're sad for these fathers who don't get to see their kids. You're sadder for the kids themselves for not being able to see their fathers. But then you're also kind of given that optimism and that like kind of warm, cuddly feeling when they do reconcile, when they're at the dance. And the dance sequence itself takes up a good like 40 minutes of the film. But I think it's needed because that is the high point. That is the climax. That is the moment where we can kind of see that this is in full effect and what the power of this thing, this program, can do. And it's a program that has consistently kept working and succeeding. This program is done all over the world now, these father-daughter dances, and I think it's just so meaningful. And as someone who has a great relationship with my father but also knows people and kids that maybe don't, it is really great to see that kind of wide perspective. And I learned a lot of new things watching it. I related to some things. I felt distanced but wanted to get educated on other elements as well, and any great documentary can do that. A great documentary does not only hold your attention for 2 hours but manages to hold your attention 2 years, 2 decades later, as you consistently think about its themes. I'm still thinking about Beyond Utopia a year later, which was my number one film at Sundance last year, and I think Daughters is a film I'll be thinking about for another 2, 5, 10, 20 years from now. And I think it's those types of movies that are some of the best of all time. So that is my top 5 Sundance films and kind of my overall Sundance in review. I didn't see as many films as I would have liked to because I just don't have time, but I am very happy with the ones I got to see, and I'm happy I got to recommend them to you. If you saw any of the films at Sundance, let me know in the comments below which ones you like the most. If you didn't see any of these but you're excited about them, let me know which ones I enticed you to see the most, because I always love to hear when people see a movie that they hadn't heard of or hadn't really heard much about, and when they discover it, they say, Dylan, like, that movie you recommended, it was really great. Or they'll say, Dylan, you recommended that movie was awful. That's happened too. But I am very glad that I get to have this platform to tell you about these movies because they are so new still and so fresh, and some of them don't even have distributors. I believe Daughters is going to Netflix. I believe Thelma has distribution. I don't think all these films have distribution yet, though, so that's going to be really fun to kind of see in the months coming what films end up in what platforms, if they end up in any platforms. There's a movie from 2 years ago that still hasn't been released, Am I Okay?, which was acquired by HBO Max and Warner Brothers, but hasn't been distributed yet. And Warner Brothers, or Max, whoever you are, listen, distribute that movie. It's a great movie. Tig Notaro deserves her spotlight. So there we go. That's my Sundance recap. It was an amazing year at the festival yet again. We got a lot of exciting stuff coming up, a lot of videos coming up in the next few months, especially in regards to Oscars. I am working my way through watching every single nominee as part of the Oscars death race, my first ever time attempting the race itself. And of course, more reviews to come as new movies come out. Dune is right around the corner. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace out.